Uh, she was the semifinalist and seventh best speaker of Atma Open 2024, ESL quarterfinalist of Belgrade WDC 2022, Open quarterfinals of CEDO Hanoi ABP 2021. Wow. All right, that's all for the judges. I'm giving it back to the chair, Kak Kezia.
Hi everyone. Thank you for the intro. Before we start, just a general reminder to please state your preferred POI method, either through chat or through announcing before you start your speech. But without further ado, let's welcome the Prime Minister if you're here.
Hey, give me a sec. Let me set up my timer. Okay. If you want to POI, just unmute your not unmute, have it. Just chat, say your team name, and then last but not least, I'm really happy standing in this grand final right now. I hope that I can give a speech that is representative to it. The motion. Just like be real quick. Oh, timer. Okay. I'm going to start my speech. Again, disclaimer, if I say anything that is wrong, if you were hurt, apologize in advance, but do call me out. And yeah, I will just start in three, two, one. I think we need to understand the construction of acknowledgement of human rights and how the progress of that look like in Indonesia. I think that we live in a context of a very diversified religion and also cultural that agree in the same thing, that LGBTQIA plus life does not matter, and it is not something that is valid and something that should be that should exist to begin with. I think we live in a context of situation in which that the current progression of acknowledgement of our rights and protection do not seem that it will progress in any way that is positive, regardless of who is standing in the political spectrum and who is going to be able to defend us. So why does the debate matter then? I think that the debate matter to be able to discuss several things. Number one, to understand whether or not that within the internal evaluation within the movement, that there is a certain type of perception and also strategy that we would like to be able to cement in order for us to create a much more solidified type of movement. But second of all, to be able to understand whether or not that there's a certain evaluation of benefit and harm from engaging to that discussion in the very first place. So the priority in opening government is that one, we want to dismiss and open and would not open a room of invalidation of our human right identity. Our rights are not something that can be negotiated, compromised, discussed at all. Second, to construct a movement that focuses on the centralization of building on legacy based on practical approach. So while that we do not try to be able to convince you that we have rights, we're going to be able to build on a legacy that would be also cement the validity that our rights exist in an extent within this particular state. Wouldn't this particular model matter in the debate, and why don't it is the most correct model that you need to be able to follow? Understand that in Indonesia, the discussion and also the negotiation part does not always work. The way that Indonesian society acknowledge your rights is on the basis of how much you can contribute within the spectrum of that particular context. Obviously, in the progress of time in the future, when the progressivity and the positive attitude toward LGBTQIA plus community increase, the tension and also the expectation would decrease over time. But for now, in the current spectrum that we are living in, we need to live in a context where we contribute and we could be able to create a positive impact. I'm talking about the amount of donation that Dolce that shut down a lot of conservative people regardless of their status as a trans people. I'm talking about the contribution and the respect that the conservative LGBTQIA plus person like Olga, for example, that could be able to be given because they have contributed significantly to the life of the people in their surrounding. That's the best way for us to be able to acknowledge this particular rights. Several clarification in which direction of the debate should not be, right? We will still engage with political discussion regarding political views in general. The debate on progressive versus conservative politics, but not specifically on the standing up point of LGBTQIA plus rights. Second, we will share our knowledge and education on local and regional LGBTQ plus movement, which I won't specify for safety purpose, but would still access to accommodate new queer kids or general society and understanding the topic of our gender and sexuality. But third, what we disengage with are specific question on discussion on rights. So should queer people exist? Can a trans person live equally as other cis person? Can I have the rights to date or engage in sexual relationship with any gender I want to? Those are not the kind of question we will engage with. But fourth, the discussion on rights is absolute, meaning it's the basic bare minimum that we will march forward to. We're going to navigate our member to be able to understand and this perspective that this is going to be engraved and doctrinated QIA plus. So it's not that because it is not an important topic to be able to talk about because it should be there to begin with. So movement on outside would still focus on demanding and building urgency rather than engaging in discussion on whether or not our existence is valid. And worst case scenario, I just want to be able to kind of like take this debate out of the window in a matter of impact, regardless of it being fulfilled or not. I think we're going to be better off because on the aspect of emotional harms from engaging with this stressful topic, the question whether or not the likelihood of changes will be there are very, very minimum and uncertain on side of opposition. So the very least what you can for our member to not have to be able to validate invalidation in their existence to begin with, which is a very distressful and harmful type of emotional damage that has been contributed generation and generation to the member of queer community. So I'm going to just directly engage with the priority, right? Understanding what is the priority within the debate. How does the construction of rights will be built on Indonesia then? And the first aspect is to understand how constitution and law in Indonesia is built. It is built on the culture of the people that live in. That is to say that the law, protection, constitution, and acknowledgement of certain rights only can be built when the majority can have certain level of acknowledgement to what your identity. So what is the current problem with status quo, right? Two things. Number one, negotiation of color heavily on negotiating and engaging to the validity of documentation online. The issue with this is four. One, this is not effective as it try to create comparative in which word is more true. The progressive psychologists in DSM-5 that say gender dysphoria as being not clinical issue, or the word of God from Quran and Bible. Second, ultimately, discourse tend to be colluded and dominated by majority. So even if that you manage to be able to engage with, most of the time the attack from majority as being the spectrum of the society are going to dominate the discussion, ended up shutting down the conversation of what you have contributed. But even if it is not dominated, it still creates the narrative that our rights are debatable, are negotiable. We don't think that this is a good message and narrative to begin with as a social movement. But fourth, which concluded it either that there would be an emotional harm that is contributed, but the reason being why it matter because it contributes to the motivation among our member, affecting the mobilization of what we can do as a person, which is a practical harms that you will get in opposition. But on top of everything else in status quo, in order for us to create a movement, we rely on the breadcrumb of respect from negotiation with majority. So let's say that I am gay, but you are right, have less position as according to the gut of the majority has say. Any progress that you get in opposition side of the house are up to majority and rely heavily on when they want to take it, when they want to be able to give it. It's not consistent and sustainable. That's why in our side it's better because respect and acknowledgement from being able to focus on a much more practical aspect are sustainable type of benefit. The practical contribution you could be able to give through the donation and the majority of religious people relying on your donation in your local community are not going to be able to allow them to be able to dismiss and invalidate your particular position. So in long term, the progressivity that you get is the increase of positive impact and positive reward and also perception among LGBTQIA plus community. But on top of that, I think that it will contribute to the decrease of needs for us to be able to fulfill that expectation. I think that concentration for now still need to be on that particular contribution circumstances. More than proud to propose in this debate.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech. Next, we'll have the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hello, am I fully audible?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. Jennifer now, she, her, POI, just through unmute yourself or raise hand. Firstly, if I were to say anything that would offend anyone, that's not my intention. I try to keep everything very equitable and not to stereotype anything. So, yeah. Firstly, I think it's important for us to, as opposition, to show how does the political discussion and how in these engaging, how the engagement towards political discussion is gonna look like under our side. Firstly, we're gonna actively talk about LGBTQ plus rights in different platforms and forums, marches and protests, for example, for the community. But secondly, we would also build awareness for Indonesians about LGBTQ plus rights because it is indeed something that's very difficult because we can see that it's not going to be just a flip of switch to suddenly change the conservatives' values, right? But it is a form of self-actualization to be able to talk about their personal identity in political settings. You speak up for your community, you get to gain equality, you inspire others to take the first step and create for them to be able to project their own sexuality, right? But also thirdly, this is like the best timeline for you to actually advocate for these types of issues, right? Because it's the best momentum to engage in political discussions. There's the rise of LGBTQ plus movements everywhere. There's the trends on LGBTQ community, etc., which means engaging in political discussions is the first step to gaining those representations that you could incentivize other queer individuals to come out and speak up as well. Because I think it is valid when OG says like, oh, it will create some sort there would still be stigma or anything that currently exists in the status quo, especially in Indonesia. But the problem is on visibility, right? A lot of people doesn't really understand, and a lot of people doesn't really see these queer people trying to actually put out their advocacy, for example, right? Which means this is justified. You cannot ignore how dehumanizing it is to not be able to be accepted by others. Speaking up is a turning point to change, and you should be the person and to engage in political discussions. But B, individual fulfillment of speaking up will also exist. It will also exist much better, right? Because being out is necessary to leverage conversation because you're more credible to convince others about queer identity. Since you actually are outward, it makes you more legitimate as well for people to actually hear you, right? But see on long-term social changes with more political discussions, which means discussion brings the community together for those collective actions to even happen, which can translate to advocacy for policies that I'm going to explain further later. Three arguments that I'm going to bring in this debate. Firstly, on why disengagement makes these individuals even more marginalized. Because disengaging reinforces the status quo. It reinforces oppressive heteronormative norms by normalizing discrimination. This manifests even more hate and makes it even worse because it's bad for individuals who want to exercise their own rights, to express their sexuality, to be with their partners outside without the fear of people actually judging them, right? But disengaging in political discussion fuels the feeling of shame for your personal identity as well because you're actually scared, right? Why is it harmful? On three things. A, shame harms individuals because queer individuals are likely to be passive when they witness discriminations or violence against other LGBTQ individuals. But B, shames also oftentimes affect others. You actively hide your queer identity by straight passing because they don't want to be seen as gay. You look at a lot of Indonesian, for example, guys that marries girls and still have children even though they're internally they know that they are gay, is just because they're scared and actively hide their queer identity as well, right? But see, without active political participation, societal awareness about the LGBTQ plus community will remain stagnant at best, misrepresented at worst, right? Because there's sanitization of LGBTQ plus stance and experience because most likely it only comes from popular media that doesn't understand the full queer experience, especially when it's not something that's fully talked about in Indonesia. But secondly, I'm going to talk about how life for these queer individuals, right? Life sucks on both sides, but agency matters. Life will be hard for LGBTQ plus individuals, regardless of their political engagement. However, the difference lies in agency. Because under the side of government, disengaging ensures that LGBTQ plus individuals remain passive. They continue to be victims of such oppressive systems, but at least engagement offers a chance and hope to gain back that power and protect the community. But even at work, worse, you are feeling good about yourself because you speak up about your identity, because you know that you are trying to
You are.
protect your people, because you know that you do want to be able to exercise your sexuality at the end of the day, right? What happens on government is that disengagement creates more vulnerability when LGBTQ plus individuals choose not to engage. They cede the political arena to more homophobic politicians, allowing them to be scapegoats and stigmatization to go and something is unchallenged by these people, right? Comparatively, on OO, when we engage, it manifests even more progress because by participating, LGBTQ plus individuals can demand more accountability to fight stigmatization of policies and advocate for even more protections. Engagement, even if it's limited, it prevents the community from being completely defenseless. But yes, I'm going to take one from CG. Okay, OG.
All of this only can happen if you prove the impact. Your harms right now exist in your status quo and probably will exist for a very, very long time. Self-actualization can only be good if you could gain positive benefit out of it.
I think it doesn't really need to manifest into anything yet currently, like on a snap of finger, right? Because you know that it is indeed very difficult because you have lived in those conservative communities yourself as well, right? But those self-actualization doesn't mean that you need to help all of the queer people in Indonesia, for example. But you know, in the internalization, that you are trying to help yourself. You're trying to help other people that are currently struggling. You are trying to actually advocate for yourself as well, which means the self-actualization is also something that is very tangible as well, right? But thirdly, on creating political change, you can disengage from politics, but politics won't disengage from you. You can try to ignore the politicians. They will still use the community as scapegoats. Tell that you bring disasters, stigmatize gays as someone that always have AIDS to fulfill their agenda, for example, just like what you see in Indonesia and a lot of those people keep saying about the queer community. On opposition, you protect yourself, you defend yourself, and get policies to at least not target you. Then you can work on policies that can help you as well. Things like AIDS testing and subsidies in Indonesia happen because in the early 2000s, LGBTQ plus activists played a huge role in fighting against all of those issues, right? Pushing for policies like free HIV testing or condom distribution, etc. What does this entail? Because this push for policies like all of those stuff and healthcare subsidies for the LGBTQ individuals requires those political engagement. Without this advocacy, these initiatives would not even exist at the very first place. These policies do save lives and demonstrate how engagement can actually manifest into tangible protections for these individuals because at least even if they do really hate the LGBTQ communities, they do care that they are human. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Next, we'll have the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Wait, let me write my POI pref and get up. All right, DPM POI through chat. Thanks, Emily. Timer, let me put it on screen. Oh yeah, if we break up if the voice is breaking up at any point, please tell me, because when I was listening to the others, I hear them breaking up on my part, so maybe it's my function. Okay. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the one thing that I want to make clear in our side that has been established in mechanism and set up by my prime minister is that one, we will still do all the practical underground things. We don't want to put it in politics and make it legal. So things like distribution of condom, HIV tests, help for abortion and everything else, we're still going to do that. It's just underground. We are putting it in group like how our predecessors used to do. So we're not going to follow suit with all the rising LGBTQI movement that is very forward like any other area because we live in Indonesia. So we will still do all the practical underground things. The second thing that we will still do as well is we will still do all the bedroom things, all the behind the door things that only happen and only you and your partner and your queer friends know. We are still going to do that. The bottom line is we are queer, even if people say that we are not and we are wrong. And will say that it is not correct or we are just confused. So all the argument about shame and all the argument about having to put yourself out there and come out and speak your truth is not a tangible benefit because you are still queer. Doesn't matter if you put it outwardly or not. Queerness is about whether you realize that you are queer, whether you feel that you are queer, whether you are trying to find out whether that is your true identity or not. So I don't think that the tangible benefit of like being out and about is a prerequisite for our movement to still be able to exist and to still have presence in group at the very least. Queer people still find a way to find each other even if we are operating underground for so long. So I do not think that is the most benefit that we can take from opposition. My two extension are going to be based on the two framing that my first speaker has brought. The first is about the framing of how we want to dismiss an open room of invalidation of our human identity to exist. But secondly, I'm going to extend on how we're going to construct a movement that focus and centralize in building legacy based on practical approach. So first, let's handle the discussion on invalidation of our human identity. The first thing that was said is that, oh, this is the perfect timing for Indonesia to follow suit because there is a rise of movement anywhere. In a way, like establishing a DPR here lah, because everybody else there's that we want to say, hey, we also exist here, give us rights as well. This sounds like this is an a priori argument. Speaking up is the first step, and then you can do everything else. But is it true? Because I think that Indonesian people is aware that queer people exist. We already for so long hear about our other friends saying about stories like, oh, is he gay? Or is he banci? And all that, right? We even know Waria exists in Indonesia for so long. They know we exist. What they do not want is acknowledge that we are the same human being as them and we are on par as them. They just think that they are better people because they don't have alternative lifestyle. So it is not about awareness, and I do not think that awareness is the number one thing that we need to do. You know what awareness does to Indonesian queer instead? It will not be like US, where if you're aware, then suddenly you can talk into UN spokesperson, you can talk into a Supreme Court or whatever. You're not going to be able to do that. The moment that you put some light into Indonesian queer community before we have any legal standing at all is that we are going to get attacked for it. How many times do you see in your algorithm, because somehow it gets in mind, that a lot of people are saying things such as sorry, hashtag #botimati, a lot of hashtags that is very, very aggressive and wanting to kill queer people. That's the reality of the world right now because maybe our incumbent is looking for a scapegoat to redirect the hate from his human rights violation, right? But anyway, that is what's currently happening. So skipping steps and immediately making yourself out there without any enclave or any safe haven that can ensure if you get kicked off by your parents, there is a community that will cater for you, like the first step that happens in our Waria community and Transpuan community. We cannot do that right now because we do not have that. So I don't think that we should leave a legacy where in the history of queer Indonesia, there was a discussion about, oh, by the way, on 2024, there was a discussion about whether we should exist or not. I don't think that is the good historical memento that we want to live in our history. So I don't think that it is normalizing discrimination, as all said, because we will still talk about discrimination. But guess who we talk about? Because presence can still to be out and about. So what we have inside the movement will be lessening the kind of pressure in lavender marriage. Maybe you will still have lavender marriage, but maybe we'll tell you, well, just don't have babies. Just tell them that you are infertile, for example, so you don't have to have sex with your partner. Or you call your girlfriend bestie and tell them that, oh yeah, ini saudara ketemu gede, for example. That's what you're going to do. You are still going to be queer. You're still going to act queer, but without outward confirmation, no matter how Juliet your auntie is, you will still say, yeah, temanku itu tomboy aja tante. You will say things like that. So it will not be normalizing discrimination. It will instead empower you in a way that is very passive-aggressive towards the hetero community because they cannot tell and they cannot and then we cannot assume as well. So there are still a lot of things that we can do without engaging, and I don't think opposition can do what we do while they engage, because the moment you engage, all of that underground movement that disseminate HIV tests, all of that underground movement that allow you abortion rights and things like that are going to be cracked down. There is a lot of community basis and recognized by government to be able to crack down on the basis of religion, by the way. I was so heartbroken when I know that they exist, but they exist and they're actively hunting us right now. So the best thing we can do is actually hide. Before I continue, I will take POICO.
Yeah, regardless if you're going to engage towards the discussion or not, this discussion will always exist to debate on your rights. So do you really want like queer people not to exist within this discussion at all? Or do you really just want like straight people to talk about it?
First of all, the discussion will not be incited because we are not the thing that is taught a lot by conservative unless we make ourselves present. What they think about is all the traditional thing that they need to fulfill because there is a lot of shoes to fill as a conservative and non-queer person already. So without you making yourself out there, they will not talk about it actually. The reason why people are talking about it right now, it's exactly because a lot of discussion are being incited. That's why it's like, chicken and egg, right? One that is going to be discussing is an echo chamber of people believing we don't have rights. So just let them be because it's not going to change. Us entering there and saying that we exist does not matter. They still think we're wrong. They still think we're sinful. So just let it be like that and just exist peacefully. Secondly, what are we going to construct then? The most important legacy as a queer person that we can give is our existence, regardless if the presence is felt outwardly in the society or not in the current moment. Just like our trans and NB predecessors have done. Let us be defined right now and respected by our other identity before our queer identity, our achievement, our profession, our Sarah, and our status as daughter and sons of people because we are Indonesian and we are queer. Dolce Gamalama is there. Yumi, the Safek top model that is out, is there. Or a lot of people that never declare, but they outwardly present as queer, like Olga, Jeremy Teti, and Mita, the Virgin. They still exist. We know they exist. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter if our parents are going to approve of us or not. For as long as there is all lives matter law, we
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. Next, we'll have the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Pio here.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
POI, directly unmute yourself. Just a disclaimer as well. Hopefully none of the speech is offending everyone, and hopefully I don't misrepresent anything from the motion as well. So if I do, then hopefully someone would call me out for that as well. Indonesia doesn't ban gay relationships or doesn't ban gay couples from pursuing their relationship. Therefore, this debate and the engagement in political discussion is never about the contentment to have same-sex marriage, for instance, or to have full freedom and acceptance to queer identity, especially in the context of Indonesia as a country. This debate talks about a more context-specific problem in which everyone faces. Oftentimes, LGBTQ community are excluded for a lot of healthcare programs to treat STD, such as HIV or even AIDS, due to Indonesia's very low literacy for how the virus spreads from human to human, not just because you are as an LGBTQ individual. It really doesn't judge you based on your sexual orientation. Insofar as you actively engage in sexual activities, there is still risk of infection, but it's not being talked about enough, especially in the political settings, for people to actually understand the context and for them to actually understand that everyone deserves the same type of treatment when it comes to healthcare and how it actually protects these queer individuals as well. I think the problem is stigmatization in Indonesia towards the LGBTQ community has far too long been solidified by society by a lot of cultural norms and a lot of religious notions and etc. To the extent that queer communities are locked out from any chances of getting this treatment as well. If these people face all of these harms that we already mentioned to you above, therefore there is an urgency for queer individuals to directly engage in a lot of these political discussion for the most basic rights to access these equal healthcare treatment for them to actually protect themselves from a lot of these problems that they actually face inside the entire country as well, right? I don't think OG could claim this debate either in a smaller scale or in the longer timeline, because if queer individuals do not talk about this problem inside a very large scale, especially in the status quo, it's very difficult to advocate for social changes and especially policies reform that is very urgent for these individuals to actually accept. That's the reason why my LO's entire context for how you need to engage in this political discussion, you need to engage directly onto constitution, for instance, is for the sake of your own self, for example, for you as a queer individual, but also on a macro level scale for the community as well. Because it's more important then for you to talk about this
POI.
problem. People to actually have the literacy to understand about this problem, to accept it, and therefore give out more policies that are specific onto this problem that these people are also facing. Because factually, a lot of LGBTQ couples, they also face these problems. They also need this protection. And this is the only way for you to actually speak up more about LGBTQ plus rights, but also get the policies that is supposed to be for these people equally as well, exactly because we're still human, we're still citizens that exists inside Indonesia as well. Because the comparative is that regional or local discussion doesn't make people realize the problem that we're currently facing. It's very difficult for these individuals to get their entire rights protected, not only because it is very small in scale, meaning that the benefits that OG can claim, talking about how you want to educate people about the queer community, how you want to talk about all the sexual problems you have. In instance, for example, if you engage in all this activity, it's very hard for you to actually talk about this on a wider scale that accommodates to a lot more queer individuals at the end. They try to talk about the personal safety idea then under OG. Several responses. I think first, there has to be engagement to my LO setup about how there's multiple ways in which advocacy can be done, right? It's not always with methods in which exposes individuals directly onto everyone's faces, for instance, in cases where you live in highly conservative area or every single people will threaten your personal safety, because obviously there's always going to be cost and benefit analysis for you to think about whether or not you should engage in these political discussion as well, right? We say that there's a lot of different forums, different platforms where you try to talk about this problem, which is why
POI.
most likely these people are going to choose the most strategic way for them to actually speak up about their problem. But secondly, then, irrespective of the context in Indonesia, there's already a lot of progress for queer discussion as well. This is true due to a lot of Western media portrayal of the LGBTQ community. There are rise of LGBTQ community, etc. This means that if you speak up as an individual, then A, on a macro level scale, it's fulfilling for individuals to self-actualize their identity and scrap off the most disturbing taglines that is put onto your community and put onto you as an individual. Because unfortunately, as disturbing as it can be, a lot of Indonesians, they still think the LGBTQ community is the reason why you have HIV inside our country. This is very dumb, but unfortunately, that's just how our country works. And the only way for you to clarify the entire problem or for you to advocate for more policies for these LGBTQ community is for you to engage in
POI.
political discussion. That is the reason why you have to be very direct and very upfront towards the constitution for to be able to talk about this problem, not only for the sake of clarifying you as an individual that you're not the cause of these disasters, you're not the cause of this disease, but it is a communal thing that every single people is related to and every single people is going to be affected to as well. But thirdly, then, even so, I think personal safety only comes when queer individuals have access to basic necessities to protect themselves. We've already clarified that the political engagement is not demands for full rights because it's very unrealistic to talk about that, especially for Indonesia. But something as simple as getting more condoms, for instance, for getting AIDS testing, etc., is something that not a lot of people and not a lot of queer individuals are able to access and therefore want to advocate that on OO. We want to clarify the fact that queer individuals are also humans and their preferences is legitimate despite all the very disgusting slurs that society throws onto them. Because unfortunately, in Indonesia, these comments will always be there regardless of your gender preferences. They're not just saying that it is bad, but they actively throw accusations onto the LGBTQ community as well. This means that even if you do not engage with political discussion, you still get threat towards your personal identity and towards your personal safety as well. You don't solve anything then under OG's role. But what's it likely then for this political discussion to be accepted in the arts of the house? Before that, anything from closing first, maybe? Okay, opening.
Right. If you are HIV positive person, you can get your met in hospital as it is covered in BPJS, but you have to answer why bringing the discussion forward can allow exclusive policy, as this is not a fiat. But then again, specifically, movement already assists and help in so many ways, and Grace has explained this.
This is the context that is specific to Indonesia then, because there's still a lot of stigmas to LGBTQ community. Either it is for your personal realization that these that even if you have different gender preferences, you still have risk towards those diseases, but the acceptance that comes from a lot of medical institution is most likely going to reject you exactly because they know your gender preference as well, which is why it's very urgent for you to talk about this, especially in the context of political setting. Why is it likely then for us to be accepted? Because first, there's a lot of scientific proofs to overturn these conservative conceptions that LGBT is the source of HIV, for instance, because that's just how illiterate some Indonesians are. You need to voice about all of these problems and engage in politics to clarify the problem, to actually understand that this is the problem that these LGBTQ community are facing. But secondly, then, exactly because it has been a prolonged epidemic in Indonesia, speaking political discussion creates awareness, understanding to how dire the situation is and how you want to solve it with actual policies. That is the reason why under our side of the house, we say that on both sides, life for queer individuals will always be very difficult, but at least under opening opposition, you have a turning point with political engagement. You push for the most basic policies to protect you as an individual, but eventually spreading out towards your entire community as well as the host.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Next, we'll have the Member of Government. Here.
Hi, before I start, is my audio clear and audible?
Loud and clear.
Hi. Okay. I'll try my best to accept any POIs. Clarification, I guess. I'm so sorry if I offend anyone, for this is not my personal stance. It's all about the debate. Oh, I'm gonna run. I'm gonna try and like speak louder because it's a bit crowded. Okay. Several responses to opening because we think that the opening is really deadlocked regarding about the kinds of political discussion in real life. We want to shift that focus of why this engagement is within the best interest of a queer individual living in Indonesia. First, going on to OG, I think we agree that the actor in this motion has the best interest to protect their privacy and safety. However, our biggest urgency on why it's aligned with the actor is that we want closure, content, and internal validation, and that's why we're going to win in this debate. Going on to OO then. OO talks about advocacy, inspiring others, but the problem is that only works in a Western society where most society is woke and accept the queer community, even if conservatives will not immediately physically attack you because you engage in that political discussion. Understand that verbally shaming someone that is clearly happening in Indonesia can still lead to scarring experiences, therefore proving that it's not within the best interest of this actor. What then is happening in the status quo? After the presidential election, there has been a rise of conservatives that agree digitalization has quote unquote tainted the minds of the younger generation, even if there is ease of access of information that allows people to know and learn about the LGBTQ plus rights. Although there might be an increase of those allies, we still believe that overall living in Indonesia as a queer person still poses safety concerns. And that is why, because you cannot achieve that external validation and external safety and comfort from other people, it's at the very least, you can achieve that as internally and focus on your personal space. Having thought on that, our winning key premises is that we want to explain as well the process of mindset to eventually choose to disengage, because I think this is really missing in OG, quickly jumping into why they would want to disengage, disregarding any efforts of having political discussion, right? Understand that their decision to disengage from any political discussion was a result of a buildup where people physically and verbally assault LGBTQ+, where people disregard our rights are not acceptable, where even those who are even allies are still too scared to speak up because the majority of Indonesian citizens still reject the notion that queer people want to have the same equal rights. This repeated experience is exactly why being rejected and disappointed by external people leads us as a queer individual to choose to disengage, even if we do silently agree. We want to bite our tongue and keep it to ourselves. Why can this lead to content, closure, and internal validation, which is the best interest, the minimum requirement for a queer individual living in Indonesia to be quote unquote happy? Understand the average queer individual would want to accept who they are, but because the situation in Indonesia is dire, actively disengaging from any political discussion will limit that barrier of entry of criticisms and rude remarks regarding your rights. In our side, I think we agree both government and op wants the best for the queer individual and want to have a chance or a safe space. Having that heart-to-heart conversations can still happen in our side as a queer individual, but we prefer to do it in the down low, only choosing certain people that we allow to talk about. Understand that I even have experiences where I have conversations with a conservative coworker that is actually genuinely curious about queer people, and I actively engage in that conversation, but it's only because I did not talk about the political discussion. I only tell her the specific information and what she wants to know. That is very important in this debate. Why? Because we want the biggest comparison is that we are not actively or explicitly doxing ourselves. As a queer individual, knowing that you have no external support or even limit to none, we understand that the best case scenario right now is to disengage political discussion because you don't want to explicitly out yourself the fact that you are an ally or you want to actively advocate or inspire LGBTQ plus rights, just what OO explained. Understand that OO talks in a perfect scenario where nobody is actively physically assaulting you just because you want to advocate and inspire others. The things that they explained is only talking in a society where they already accept LGBTQ plus communities, and that they believe that even if we do accept you, we still don't want you to have your own rights. In our side, we believe that living in Indonesia is very different with what is happening in the West. Understand that our biggest trade-off is that you will risk your own safety, right? Understand that even if we cannot create a big change or create a big trend in social media, at the very least, you are content of who you are. You choose to silence yourself, you choose to bite your tongue. But we believe that having that internal validation will survive, will inspire you to keep on living, because that is the best interest of a queer individual living in Indonesia. Going back, linking back to our biggest urgency that is missing in OG, because they only stop in talking about the protection of their privacy and safety. We believe that coming from opposition, there is no likelihood of advocacy at all. Even if they want to prove that there is a rise of safe communities, we believe that it's little to no chance that there is going to be policy changes happening in Indonesia. And even if it's going to happen, it's going to be very slow and it's going to be an uphill battle. Why then this decision of disengaging from any political discussion will eventually lead to internal validation, and we want that happiness achieved by this queer individual is because the fact that you do not have external support, but at the very least, you can accept who you are. Second, you do not have that internalization hatred coming from others, even if you are or you might be triggered from other rude remarks from other people. At the very least, you as yourself will not waver. You will not turn your back against your community, but you can silently support it. Just like OG explained, that we want to keep it in the down low and we want to make it underground. But the problem is OG immediately skips to the point that safety and choosing to protect your own personal space is important. We want to shift that focus into self-actualization to the point that internal validation is going to provide you that happiness, and that you do not have to rely on other people. You do not have to have that repeated experience of being disappointed, of being disregarded by other people. Understand that in our side, community can still build one another. You can still have that close relationships. You can still have conversations with others, right? But the problem is you are not actively engaging or outing yourself, the fact that you want to fight for LGBTQ plus rights. Understand that the biggest trade-off happening in opposition side is that you are sacrificing your own safety and your own safety and privacy, not knowing that it guarantees the change of mindset, the change of policies happening in Indonesia, right? So therefore, we already explained and extended what has been said to OG, proud to oppose. Propose.
Thank you, Member of Government, for that speech. Next, we'll have the Member of Opposition. Here.
Hello, audible, yeah.
Loud and clear.
Okay. I go by they, them. If you guys have an API, just unmute yourself. Trigger warning, maybe it's going to be like trauma inducing for some people here. I'm trying my best not to be that kind of speech, but it's going to be personal, at least for me. So yeah, going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I posted my pictures with my ex-boyfriend a few times on Twitter, and those few times, homophobic people basically quoted it and turned it into a discussion whether or not my relationship with him was normal, whether or not it's okay for us to actually exist within this country to the very beginning, right? I think these examples not only happen to me, it happens towards a lot of queer people on Twitter, a lot of alter account on Twitter where random straight people just quote it and turn it into a discussion to actually fulfill their ego to the very begin with. Why this experience is important? Because first, it rebuts the entire idea of OG when they said that queer issue is not something that straight people actually talk a lot about to the very beginning of track, because they will talk about queer people unprovoked to the very beginning of track. But moreover, I think it's also going to let you know that the case of OO cannot fly within this debate. Because what? Because OO always assume that discussion about queer people in Indonesia is always productive. That queer people will never be like basically like dominated by the straight people in social media, for the example, whenever the discussion actually raised to the very beginning track. So therefore, what we need to talk about in this debate is not whether or not this discussion is something that's going to be actually like be much productive or not to the very beginning track. But what we need to talk about, on whether or not the engagement of queer people, queer individuals in this kind of discussion can actually like give the idea of like protections, the idea of like basically the idea that you're not alone when someone actually like attack you on Twitter. For a lot of queer individuals who barely have anyone to actually want to fight for them, if queer people just shut up the moment that they see like homophobia discussion exists within social media to the very beginning track. This why closing opposition's case is going to be the most important one. Because first, we're going to talk about on how, if queer individuals engaging towards this kind of political discussion, it will make a lot of queer people actually like feel safe for themselves. There it will actually like make them believe that there are also queer people who actually want to fight for them to the very beginning track. Because I think this sense of protection is going to be the most important things within the debate to the very begin with. Because even if we cannot have like the political like policy changes as what CJ actually talked about, at least in CO, queer people can finally have the understanding that they're not alone within in this country, that there will always be people who willing to fight for them in a discussion when they are actually like dominated by the homophobics to the very beginning track. None of the benches talk about this, and I think this is the most important thing that queer people actually like experiencing in this country. There will always going to be someone who talks shit about you and make it into a discussion unprovoked to the very begin with, because this is just basically the online like culture nowadays to the very begin with. One point of like several point of rebuttals towards golf bench before going into my case. First, let's talk about on how the idea that OG cannot win this debate. Because first, I think regardless if OG give us a lot of mechanization on how they want to create their make it like doing all of this campaign down low and it's okay and stuff like that, it's not supposed to be what they're actually talk about in this debate. Because all of that things can also exist in the case of opposition to the very beginning track. The biggest burden of the entire golf bench is not whether or not they can campaign for queer people also. But the biggest question is supposed to be on whether or not if queer individuals actually like engaging towards this discussion, it will actually like be counterproductive towards all of this movement that they want to do down low to the very beginning track. So therefore, in CO, we're going to say we can have it all to the very begin with. But most importantly, we need to provide the idea for a lot of queer people that the queer community will want to stand with them to the very begin with. When someone actually like spark discussion about their rights to the very begin with, which is something that the entire debate cannot prove to be exclusive unless in CO, where queer people is going to be the only people who want to protect each other to the very beginning track. But second of all, I think when all this talks about like the idea of invalidation and overwhelming the moment that you will always engage towards discussion, I think it's okay to the very beginning track. Because this idea of invalidation, this idea of overwhelming is actually like the reason why Marsha P. Johnson actually like throw the first break in Stonewall movement to the very beginning track. It's literally the very first step of any kind of movement. The moment that you feel like your rights is very much violated, the moment that you feel like it's very much overwhelming for you to engage towards the discussion about yourself to the very beginning track. So it's okay. We can take that as a benefit. But second of all, let's close the entire closing government case within the debate the moment they talk about they want to prioritize the idea of safety and protection and privacy, stuff like that to the very beginning, right? Because judge, the moment that you want to fight, the moment that you want to engage towards this queer discussion, there is no obligation that you need to always expose your identity. There are a lot of like cyber accounts barely showing their face, barely showing their real name that actually like, engaging towards these discussions to the very beginning begin on track. Even bigger movements like Klub Sama Dengan, for the example, Arus Pelangi, actually done anonymously to the very begin with, because it is an option for them to actually engage towards this queer discussion without showing their true identity to the very begin with track. People do this all the time. People do it through different platforms to the very begin with. Their entire case will not be important within the debate, because this discussion even barely done actually like directly from people to another people to the very begin with, right? No case for them. Going to my first point of argument here, the sense of protection and how it can happen to the very begin with. Let's talk about on how like the discussion culture race in the status quo to the very beginning. Track. I already told you my personal experience that I believe that a lot of queer people also experience. But let's talk about when something actually like happened. For the example, is like in the case of Ragil, when Ragil actually like have podcasts with Deddy Corbuzier and etc. to the very beginning. Track. A lot of straight people make the discussion into like portrayals on how like basically it's not normal for you to be gay and get married to another man, for the examples, right? If queer people, queer individuals do not want to engage towards this, imagine if you're being Ragil and seeing that no people actually want to fight for you to the very beginning of the track. You're going to feel like you're alone. You're going to feel like there's no point of basically like living, simply because no one want to fight for you to the very beginning with. But imagine when you're him and you see that a lot of queer people also standing with you, regardless of the number of homophobia that homophobic people that also going to quote your tweet at the end of the day. The moment that you see 100, like even only 10 people anonymously like trying to fight for you simply because they're also queer, it will make you give you the sense of protections. It will give you the sense of like belongings, that your community actually like exists there for you to the very beginning of track. But second of all, not only is only going to provide you the sense of protection, it will also help a lot of your community to improve better to the very beginning of track, because these discussions is actually what triggers a lot of research about on how they could improve the movement better, for the example, about on how like the problems of thinking that exists within the homophobic people, for the example, which could never exist if you never engage towards the discussion directly to the very begin with, for the all queer teams in CO.
Thank you, member of opposition, for that speech. Next, we'll have the government whip here.
Hi, Jose, am I audible?
Oh, could you try saying that again?
That's audible then.
There seems to be minor feedback, but you're audible.
Bentar. If I move here, is it still feedback loop?
Much better.
Oke, sip. Give me a few seconds ya, soalnya pindah. Bentar. Di profile, di WhatsApp, POI review di chat. Oh, oke. Terus apa lagi? Oh ya, disclaimer, I feel like first off, thank you for having such a great motion for the finals. Second, apologies if this is triggering, but I really do believe that having a platform means there needs to be some form of education. Everything I say in my speech is either a personal experience or a story someone entrusted to me. I promise there will be no name dropping whatsoever, but I feel like it's important for awareness purposes. In 2015, there was a group of lesbians in Kota Tua having a discussion about what it takes for women to have rights, specifically perkawinan and how we can have lesbian couples. They were disregarded by the government. They were actually dragged, beaten, and when they went to Komnas, Komnas did not care. They went to Komnas Wanita. Komnas Wanita actually cared, but there was an internal fight between the two branches, and finally the issue resolved on its own because it was deemed as too political. We don't want this kind of world where we expose ourselves as individuals, where even groups of people, where even social movement, it's still at risk. Especially the current regression that we see in status quo, we don't think this risk is just a byproduct of, people getting scared, people being cowards. We don't think that's the case, right? So clarifications, we do see that, unfortunately, I think there is a concession for everyone that it's going to be a hard road either way. But why is it going to be the lesser evil on our side of the house? Simply because political discussion inherently means that you are not going to get the amount of closure or safety or sense of camaraderie that CEO actually wants. We say camaraderie is important, that's very true, but you can get it through personal connection. I think even in PM speech and my first speaker speech, both first speakers in government benches told you about how personal connection and support can exist without making it political. If anything, being painted as a pinnacle in a community, in a society, in a group of friends, as the, Ruta LGBT is not something people want, exactly because it washes out every other part of you and you're just an identity, a sexuality, and we don't want that to happen, right? Here's what happens. The concept of a right is something that's going to be generalized. Meanwhile, what are the conditions of you as a queer person in Indonesia? Probably it's not going to be like someone in the US, right? My first speaker has already talked about why it's so difficult in status quo, specifically how it also impacts our mindset. For example, if someone in the US speaks up, there can also be backlash. That's very true. But when they seek shelters, there's a group of people already there with welcoming arms. In here, if you're shackled in the village because someone thinks that they have to rukiah you, for example, help is not readily available. It exists, true. In Jakarta, it exists in safe houses randomly spread across the country. That's not easily accessible as well. So we say that the portrait painted by CEO is unrealistic at worst and only easily accessible by the very few who already have established connections at best. Even when you have awareness of this issue, the effectivity is not going to be as high. Second of all, it's quite specific, right? Because you're not going to be comforted by the idea that, oh, you are valid. No, you have internalized hatred, you have internalized homophobia, for example, even if you are part of the community. I have seen so many people, you probably know people like this as well, where you do realize your fear, but even you yourself deny it. Even if you are out and proud about it, you might not want to engage in political discussions because it reminds you, it triggers you of those kinds of discussions. And exactly this is what's hurtful because it actually bleeds through your personal relationships, your work relationships, and everything else. Because when it's political, people jump on it because it justifies it as a public platform, something to be discussed about, and you're at the center of it. This is not the kind of attention. The thing is, having a platform is nice when you can control the narrative. And in this case, we cannot. And I think this is a consensus from all four teams already, right? So that there's not supposed to be like a heavy burden to prove that. Here's what I mean. For example, the kind of safe spaces you see in Indonesia. For example, in Jakarta, there's a lot of progressive people, right? Why do we value people? Because you can be a funny bencong at a Sweet 17 party held by rich kids, right? Because you're funny and people at the workplace are stressed. So they like you being there because they think that you're such a cool girl and they know that, oh, you have a friend and they feel like, oh, yeah, it's great that I know your secret and I feel special about it. The level of performative allyship is still quite high in Indonesia, unfortunately. And this is the kind of thing that makes it so unpalatable for us to engage in this kind of discussion. It is not something that validates us. If you want validation, like what government member has stated, you probably want something along the lines of, hey, see me as a person beyond my sexuality, beyond my gender identity. But that's not the case. Let's see what happens when you actually discuss these things, right? In simple political discussions, for example, how do you educate people? Because there's already an outside social movement, so the urgency isn't really there. The language is usually complex English that you have to introduce. That means you need to have a formalized kind of language, and not everyone is equipped with that. The people are not ready to accept it, and you have to have a constant kind of contact with them if you want to give proper education. We don't think pushing this burden on individuals, on ourselves, is a necessary measure we need to take, not in status quo at the very least, right? If you want the idea of inspiration that OO wants, we say that sure, being an inspiration is a good thing if it works. Because if you're someone who is questioning whether or not you're queer, and you see someone who is queer, either by them being doxxed or them outing themselves, you do not want to be associated with someone who gets beaten up on the street. You do not want to be associated by someone who is the main source of gossip in the workplace or at school or in class, right? This is the kind of thing that actually makes you shy away from opening up. On our side, true, you have to bite your tongue when you get triggered. But when you realize that, hey, I think I can talk to this person and this person actually needs help, you can reach out on a personal level without making it political. And it makes you feel seen that, hey, we're in this together. That's the kind of camaraderie. It's quite bittersweet, actually, right? Because you cannot really prove that you're going to make change or progress, but you still get a sense of camaraderie. You have a supporting system in the sense of exploring yourself, validating your identity, maneuvering it through a very conservative lens, which still validates you and feels like you belong somewhere, that there are people like you, that there is a label for what I am, and that it is okay to be like that. There's a kind of comfort that we provide without having to out ourselves, without having to publicize who we are. And even in the best case where people understand, oftentimes there are people who, sure, they will not beat us up, they will not get violent, but the biases are still there, and it's still harmful, and it's still hurtful. People who say, hey, be careful of dating a bi person because they're twice as likely to cheat. Hey, be careful with that person because they're demi or an ace person. They probably do not desire you as much and you will never be satisfied in bed. This kind of things and narratives still exist, right? We say that when you are political, these kind of very personal, very private narratives are put on the table. We never want that to happen. What have we proven to you so far? The fact that the mindset of Indonesia is not there and very specifically contextualized from me and my first speaker, and also why it's not worth the cost. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip, for that speech. Next, we'll have the Opposition Whip. You're here.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
You're audible and visible.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Trigger warning might, I don't think like, oh, wait. Laptop's dying. Trigger warning might be talking about some sensitive stuff and might be borderline offensive. I hope it doesn't offend anyone and I hope it doesn't come off that way. And also thank you, IWGM. It was such a fun competition with very fun motions, and I hope this can continue as a competition that concludes a safe space for IWGMs. And yeah, I'll immediately just start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think we're talking about, as a queer person, specifically under this motion, when we concern the idea of identity, our queerness, or maybe like our sexuality, or like whatever it is, that should be a definitive agreement throughout the fall 14s that us as a person is always gonna be engaged with the idea of our queerness. It doesn't matter that we are out. It doesn't matter whether we are engaged in our political discussions or disengaged. I think identity of being queer itself is very strongly embedded in us. And that's why everything we do later on is gonna be seen as something political, right? Or not political per se, but everything that we do will come back to the idea of us as a queer person. That's why I feel like spaces such as IWGM itself exists because the idea and your identity as a woman and gender minority can only be like is an inherent part of you and should be like celebrated, or to an extent should be put out in like any kind of views or discussions that you happen. So when CG Whip, Government Whip comes here and mentioned that at the end of the day, we want people just to see us as like a human, and like, yeah, at the end of the day, like, please see us through our like sexual or like queerness and stuff. I don't think that can work in the debate specifically, because when you are a queer person, what matters and like how people can fully accept you or how you can fully be integrated towards a society or an discussion is by knowing that you are queer, because you live different experiences even if you are not out. Especially if you are not out, there are many experiences that define your queerness, and that's why it matters to be integrated into this kind of political discussions. And that's what Katami's argument, especially regarding like the idea that there is a variations of like different queers all over Indonesia matters, and representation matters. But if you are on an LGBT community, the discussion is only gonna happen in some echo chamber that is only full of like and SJWs, it's still matter for you as an individual to stand up, because that is the case that you and other queers live very different experiences, and therefore you have the responsibility to step up to show your own experience. But also moving on to that idea, also on the idea that like how actually like political discussions look like, because I feel like government has took advantage of this and suddenly like managed like, oh, like all of political discussions is just full of like conservative trying to define who your rights are. Or maybe on CG by mention like, oh, the political discussion is basically like you need to out yourself and like you discuss, which is I think it's like confusing because that's not what happens in real life. Like political discussions, I think yes, they do happen in like conservative people trying to tell you who you are, but also I think it happens in like semi-public spaces, or maybe it also happens in internet spaces where you don't have to out yourself. So outing yourself to have a political discussion is not a fiat in this debate and therefore should not be credited. But also second, how do they actually manifest in real life and what do they do to the movement? I feel it's simply like kehadiran kelompok arus pelangi in Desak Anies when they ask Anies like what do they think of LGBT rights. Anies himself said that like, yeah, I don't think LGBT people should get married, but I'm gonna make sure that discrimination, like structural discrimination, is gonna be removed. This is simply the best idea of why having political discussion matters, because that is the only way you can see the parameter of how progressive your movement is moving, right? Because if you are disengaged from any political discussion and you just stick on whatever OG is doing, which is giving like, I don't know, donations in underground, or you just stick into whatever CG is doing, which I think is also quite derivative from CG, what from OG, what happens is you don't even know what is going out in the real world anymore. Sure, maybe they can try and like POI and mention news happen, you can still like talk with your queer friends, but see, you become friends with these people because they share the same identity too. Like for me in Jatinangor, I'm a queer person in Jatinangor, so probably the people I'm talking to are also queers of Jatinangor who only knows most likely what is happening in Jatinangor or what is happening in Twitter, right? They don't understand what is happening in a layer of that, and that's why political discussions become the most exclusive way to know about the parameter of progressive movement and also specifically movement about your own rights as a queer individual in Indonesia. But also on the idea of that, sure, we take the bullet that not all progressive, not all political discussions is gonna be progressive, and that's why also like OO's idea should be kicked out, and why we outframe OO is because we agree that not all political discussions is gonna be progressive, and not all of them is gonna be accommodative to you. But that's the idea of discussion, that it is a two-way exchange. It is a way for you to express your views and know like how you can progress with your views, right? That is why other tools such as anonymity can help you, or like being an anonymous person or joining a discussion as a part of an organization and not as an individual. But if you disengage, you lose all this exclusivity, because simply all you know is like doing your own donation. All you care about is just you as an individual, when you know that in Indonesia this is a collective fight. There is a common enemy, which is the government and the conservatives that are trying to put out against you. So that's why it very matters for us. But also let's do a more direct engagement to all like the ideas and the arguments that exist under the current debate. First of all, the idea under OG, and I think this is very simple, the whole idea is that you want to still create a legacy, but at the end you're still gonna get community of queers. I think to flip the argument of legacy is very simple. The legacy that you get when you like keep on donating, but you're just like hiding your identity, or probably I'm just gonna donate as Deborah, it's not really gonna be fulfilling, right? Because like the people that know that I'm donating as Deborah only knows me as like, oh yeah, that's like Deborah, anak Unpad HI and stuff like that. But I think what also matters is like when the donation also happens, or when like the discussion happen, or like anything happens when you actually have or tangled your identity towards that. Like, what is the comparison outside of the house? Because when you join political discussions, even as an anonymous person, or when you join it in organization, or you do it in like echo chambers of other fellow queers, what happens is that people know that you have tried to fight for the LGBTQ rights. And I think that sense of legacy that you are fighting for a right is going to be much more fulfilling to you as a queer person living in Indonesia, knowing of all the discriminations that you're going to face. Please, you put a foot in history trying to fight that stuff away, right? But when you're just like, I don't know, when you just like keep on like doing donations, which is not exclusive on our side, because we still can do that. But if you exclusively do that, instead you're gonna get the guilt, because you don't need, because you're gonna donating to like the conservative anyway, because they said like donating to like Muslim, but masjid and stuff like that. Because and at the end of the day, you don't even know like what these donations do to the people that actually suffer the collective fight against you, right? But also second, so that's why legacy is not exclusive, and it's even better on our side of the house. But also second, the idea of community, and this directly engaged to three benches of like today's debate besides of us. So what happens on the under comparison of community is that what happens in our side, your community is gonna be more entangled to you because they know you are not afraid to take a step in fight, and that's why the safety that happens and also the emotional bond is gonna be much more better, and that's why it creates you also a better sense of identity to get up and still fight. Meanwhile, in the other side of our house, which the government, the community is like literally just hidden communities or people that share like the same ideas with you with very little room for progression and never been more proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition whip, for the speech. That marks the end of the grand finals round. Congratulations